when a client creates a list of priorities of what they're looking for the most, it's really important for them to be honest with themselves about it. We always tell them that we want the list of the 10 things that they're most interested in, and that our goal is to hit the bullseye, but that sometimes just hitting the wall is a challenge based on the degree of difficulty of the search, degree of difficulty of the kinds of things they're looking for. Again, it's the more enlightened client that realizes if the chemistry is right and the culture fit is right, and there may be 1 or 2 ingredients or 3 or 4 ingredients that aren't quite on the mark, that the person is likable enough and we feel good about that person being able to really succeed in this culture, in this environment, that individual will then be successful because people will want to come in and have them win. Our relationship with the Planck Center for Leadership and Public Relations at the University of Alabama stems from our desire to really understand the importance of the intangibles in hiring a communication executive. It's different for a lot of other functions because a lot of other functions have are much more quantifiable, and so as a result of the ability to create that kind of quantifiable data, this is a lot more qualitative, and as a result, in creating sort of qualitative data to try to find the right people, we work with the University of Alabama in the graduate program to really focus in on intangibles such as integrity, self-awareness, things of that nature. And those are the kinds of things, I would argue, that make the difference between a world-class chief communications officer and somebody who's treading water as fast as they can just to keep up. One of the questions that I like to ask when it comes down to supervising and management, and one of the answers I like to hear, by the way, are how people will admit that supervising and managing is hard. Communicators tend to start their careers as individual contributors, great media relations people, great speechwriters, great employee communications or employee engagement contributors. And it's not until they've succeeded at those things that people say, oh, this person's good, they ought to be elevated to the next level, we're going to ask them to supervise. Nobody gives them that management experience. I like hearing when people tell me how hard they thought that was. Now, you also like to hear people say with a certain level of relaxation in their tone that I've really learned to like to manage. I can talk about a couple of people that I've mentored along the way. We have several CCOs that we've placed that can give us a laundry list of people that have worked for them over the years. They're now either heading up communications someplace or heading up communications as a business unit. I think it's the ones that feel that this is easy, that people really like me, and people, they tend to not necessarily have great reputations as managers. They think they've done it because they've got on paper a bunch of people that report up to them, but they're not necessarily considered to be good strategic leaders. You know, the data that you can develop on candidates, a lot of that has to do with hitting a checklist of what are the things that your client is most interested in and what areas they're willing to give a little bit. I mean, if a person's, I make this up now, but if a person's applying or they're a candidate for a chief communications officer job that has a broad scope of responsibilities, let's say it's got all of corporate communications, all of public affairs and public policy, government relations, investor relations, if there's one of those ingredients, if you will, or one of those pieces they haven't managed, it's way better for them to say, that's not one that I've managed, but my goal would be to hire the best possible person who could report into me that would partner with me to create the right kind of, whether it's government relations or investor relations function. And I think people who tend to brag about, or not brag about, but in their interview talk about being able to do all of that when they may have only had a cup of coffee in a couple of those areas is really not an effective way to sell yourself as a candidate.